Blackpool is the UK's most popular seaside resort, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a more interesting stretch of coast anywhere in Britain. It's big, it's brash, and for the student of social history, it presents something very special indeed. For out there, in the shadow of the lights, is the story of us, of our fashions and fascinations, and of our fears. This is the history of the great British seaside holiday, the story of a town called Blackpool. In July 1970, a bungalow was being demolished in Carlton, near to Poulton Elk, when a strange discovery was unearthed. The complete skeleton of an elk, having laid undisturbed for over 13,500 years, was found in a pocket of peat in the suburban garden just outside Blackpool. But that was not all. The animal had been wounded, over 17 times in fact, and sharp-edged, barbed lances were discovered with it, some of which still embedded into the skeleton. These small echoes of life are the earliest evidence of humans living and hunting on the coastal plain that would one day be home to Blackpool. The elk survived its attack by our ancestors, having limped away before the ice gave way on a frozen lake, burying the animal in a thick layer of peat. It can now be seen in the Harris Museum in nearby Preston, reminding us of a Blackpool so old as to almost be frightening to think of, when the sea lapped further away against a cold and silent coastal plain, home only to dune grass and the passing footsteps of our hunter-gatherer forefathers. In fact, this scene would remain almost unchanged on the Fylde for thousands of years. It may have once been home to a pre-Roman tribe known as the Satanti, or the Dwellers in the Water, a sub-tribe of the more well-known Brigantes, but few of them dwelt there permanently, and even fewer left evidence of their habitation. The Anglo-Saxons came and went, with the Domesday Book of 1086 recording small settlements, often with Norse or Viking place names, suggesting the invading Norsemen were able to live in relative harmony with the Saxons, and most likely the origins of a local folk story, the ghost bells of Kilgrimall, said to sound from beneath the waves in memory of a long-lost settlement. But what about Blackpool itself? Its name first appears in the medieval period, where a stream that drained a local lake into the sea was discoloured by the peat, that same peat of which earlier helped to preserve our ancient elk. This discoloured water was known as Lipool, or sometimes simply Pool, as noted in early church records from 1602, of where it was also known for the first time as Blackpool, the settlement itself a small hamlet by the sea, with its first substantial house, known as Foxhall, not being built until the end of the 17th century, by the Squire of Myerscough, Edward Tildesley, of whose friends and relations were amongst the first people to actually visit Blackpool for the promise of its fresh and bracing sea air, of which was said to aid their health. In fact, by the second half of the 18th century, this idea that sea air and sea bathing could cure disease was growing increasingly popular. Inspired by this promise, the wealthy classes began to visit Blackpool like a kind of pilgrimage, trekking across coast and country for a chance to bathe in the cold Irish Sea. They would often be aided by bathing machines, wooden chambers on wheels taken to the sea edge, the bather inside undressing before opening the door and submerging themselves into the water. There were even professional dippers, or assistants for wealthy women, of whom would help to assure the safety of our often inexperienced sea bather, for whom it may be their very first time taking to the waters. To capitalise on these new arrivals in the sleepy coastal village, a road was built to accommodate stagecoaches from Manchester and Halifax in 1781, and 4 hotels were built, one of which was Bailey's Hotel, later known as the Metropole, and still standing today near to the North Pier. The others were Foreshaw's, now the Clifton Arms, Hudson's at Lane's End, and Hull's Hotel, now the site of a chain pub and restaurant. As well as these hotels, amenities for the weary sea bathers were erected in the town, and by 1819, Henry Banks, the so-called father of Blackpool, saw the potential in these new health-crazed visitors descending onto the beach, and set to work on building the very first holiday cottages in Blackpool. For those willing to take the trip, the seaside holiday had been born. Perhaps the most important event in the growth of Blackpool was the railway. When the 1846 Poulton to Blackpool line opened on the Preston and Wyre Joint Railway, the town itself could be said to explode into being and motion, just like the fires in the hearts of those old steam locomotives. The world was on the move, and travel to Blackpool was suddenly made possible to thousands of people for whom, having lived out their lives in these grey-skied worlds of the industrial cotton towns, was a very special thing indeed. Seemingly overnight, people started to come to Blackpool in their droves, leading to a sudden boom period of business, industry and investment in the town, of which by 1851 had ballooned in population from only 473 in 1801 to over 2,500 and growing. This incredible influx of interest in Blackpool, and of the new seaside holiday concept in general, was helped in part by the holiday fashions of the industrial towns, for whom adopted a practice known as Wakes Weeks, the name coming from earlier religious vigils, of which sometimes included the opportunity to let one's hair down and enjoy some fun and games when the solemn prayers were done with. But as industry grew, the observance turned more and more secular, and far more important too, especially for a town like Blackpool. Each town would close its mills for a different week, creating a mass exodus of workers and their families, of whom would venture on holiday on the new medium of rail travel. And, since each town would close for a different week, Blackpool saw a steady and seemingly never-ending supply of new visitors, leading to a period of incredible investment in the town.
Here we have vivid pictures of the biggest strike that mill country's ever known. No mules spinning, and no looms weaving. And I did hear say there was no trams running neither. There's Summit up with Summit. I know what it is, I've just remembered. It's Wakes Week. The entire population is basking and bathing at Blackpool. Here's a gradely do, plunging and swimming in pool. Who's having a good time, who is?
A holiday to Blackpool could be a moving and memorable thing. In 1863, the North Pier was opened to the public, granting the opportunity to gently stroll out to sea without the need to get your feet wet or trudge along the beach. And in 1868, Central Pier or the People's Pier followed suit, this time with a theatre and open-air dance floor. And in 1893 came the South Pier, making Blackpool the only resort in the whole of the country to have not one, but 3 separate seaside piers. And let us not forget the genuine joy that these things brought to our holiday makers. The simple pleasures of sun and ocean, the mere sight and sound of the carousel. In the glimmer of the sea, a million promises were renewed. The dust of the mills scattered to the wind, so that they may have wished that their holiday could go on forever. And for those living and working in the town, they may have wished so too. Investment and progress, the town's motto, was evident everywhere. The Winter Gardens, opened in 1878, was the largest entertainment venue of its kind anywhere outside London, and surely the grandest. And that was not all. Blackpool was the first town in the world to have electric street lighting, the forerunner of the famous illuminations, a marvel of which cemented the name of Blackpool as the most advanced and fascinating holiday destination of them all. And if even that was not enough, 1885 saw one of the world's first electric tramways installed on Blackpool Promenade, allowing visitors not only a comfortable and safe way to move around, but providing experiences they had never seen before. Imagine the joy in the eyes of a child, having never seen or even heard of electric lighting before, being suddenly transported to a world of colour and light as the tram they sat in gently took them down the Golden Mile, the new name for Blackpool Promenade, itself lined with peddlers and hawkers selling everything you could think of, from souvenir shells to the chance to see into your future. For the true thrill-seeker, however, there was always the Pleasure Beach, founded in 1896 with the aim, according to its founder, Alderman William Bean, to make adults feel like children again. Amongst its first attractions was Hiram Maxim's flying machines, still operating in the park today, and the river caves, allowing riders a whistle-stop tour of the world by boat. These rides are important, not just for their advanced technology of the time, but for the experience they provided to people for whom such vivid scenes would be barely imaginable only a few years before the railways arrived. The river caves could be, for many, the closest thing they could ever get to seeing the pyramids and the wider world, and to do so in the arms of your loved ones would form lasting memories, even fixing a broken spirit, and making true the early claims of finding healing here on the lapping coast of Blackpool. And to top it all off, the jewel in the crown of this colourful resort, Blackpool Tower, was opened to the public on the 14th of May 1894. At the time of construction, it was the tallest building anywhere in the British Empire, inspired by the famous Eiffel Tower of Paris. It was not always smooth sailing, however. A fire in 1897 could be seen from over 50 miles away, and when the tower's poor paint job led to early corrosion, it was almost demolished, before being instead rebuilt in the 1920s. Inside, visitors could marvel at the Grand Circus, opening in 1894 for the price of 6 pence, before retiring to the ballroom, built to a design by architect Frank Matcham, and still today one of the most beautiful examples of such a building that you can visit.
The red man alive, number 5. The yellow boat 3, so 3. The white 8, so 80. Blue 5 and 1, 51.
There really is something special about Blackpool. There's a spirit about the place, a presence moving on the whistling wind. To many, this feeling could be described as the essence of the British seaside holiday, something of which Blackpool actually helped to create, as something unique and close to all of our hearts. Unlike many resorts, Blackpool stayed open during World War II, actually increasing in size during this period. In fact, from the 1930s to 50s, the pleasure beach was thriving more than ever, with the park sold to the Thompson family, of whom in 1934 installed the Grand National, an intense wooden roller coaster where two trains appear to race on adjacent tracks. And later, in 1936 came the Big Dipper, the quintessential example of the golden age of roller coasters. For those perhaps less enthralled by the fun of the fair, the 1920s had also seen the construction of Stanley Park, a beautiful garden of over 260 acres, with boating lake, bandstand, and ample space to simply sit and be. There was something for everyone, and nobody benefited more than the hundreds of hotels and guest houses of which had sprang up all along the coast, many of which offering little more than small rooms with shared bathrooms and the promise of a cooked meal in the morning.
Now look, I've given you 2 keys again, Keith. Your bedroom key, your front door key, so it doesn't matter. You know where everything is, and you know where the room is. Well, I'm catering for a mixed, Jen. I'm mixed. I've got some teenage boys in. I've got an elderly couple. I've got a granny and granddad and grandson.
We have a regular clientele that come back year after year because they know that we provide good accommodation, which is clean, and good food. And they know that when they go out of the house, they'll go out with a full tummy, you know, so they don't have to buy a lot of food when they're out.
In many ways, these bed and breakfasts were at the heart of Blackpool's success moving to that second half of the 20th century. At a peak season, such as in 1981, when all 28,000 deck chairs were hired out in the town, these guest houses would be full to bursting, and they hoped to stay that way. Innovation continued in the town, of whom by the 1960s was having to contend with the growing appetite for package holidays and the growth of overseas travel. The illuminations had started in 1879 and continued to grow in size ever since, the displays now changing with every year to keep things fresh and keep up with the temporary fashions and styles of which come and go by the season's end, lighting up the world for a brief moment before fading away. And then there were the shows. In the mid-20th century, variety shows were increasingly popular, the acts forming in the shadow of vaudeville and music hall theatre. And for many big names of the time, Blackpool was the place to be. There was nothing else quite like it, with long seasons and a constant stream of new audience members, making a season in Blackpool simply the best in the business. You could visit the pleasure beach for a ride on the Dipper, relax on the beach with your fish and chips, and then spend the evening with a couple of shows. Morecambe and Wise, Ken Dodd, Tommy Cooper, they all played here, walked these old streets, and brought joy to the faces of thousands. But were we still content with these simple things, these pier end shows and fish and chip suppers, when travel agents were offering bigger, bolder, and more extravagant holidays than ever before? Blackpool, as it turns out, had thought of that too. When the Pepsi Max Big One opened in 1994, it was the tallest and steepest roller coaster anywhere in the world, as well as boasting one of the longest tracks. Its construction changed Blackpool's skyline forever, towering at 213 feet tall. Furthermore, the opening of the Sea Life Centre in 1990 allowed visitors to come face to face with undersea life without needing to travel the world or squeeze into a diving suit. Your hotel might even have live entertainment every evening, and you could never be stuck for something to eat on the Golden Mile, the candy floss scented kingdom of the chip. But growth was beginning to slow, and cracks started to show behind the painted facades. With the decline of traditional industry, the Wakes Weeks effect had long since dried up, and people were coming for shorter times, even just for the day, as the M55 motorway meant people could visit and be home in time for their evening meal. Even the biggest investments could not, it seems, pause this decline. Someone visiting for the Pleasure Beach rides might not even venture outside of the park, as if the rest of the town may as well not even be there. And some didn't even bother at all. The allure of distant skies was far too tempting. The shiny travel brochure promising sun and glamorous days, a world away from rainy old Blackpool. The sea does not change, but we do. Walking along the back streets of Blackpool now, you can witness the effects of this decline, where those old guest houses rot and rust. The laughter of those old holidays now muted, replaced by the mockery of the gull's cry and the silent streets. Some have been ripped out entirely, like a missing tooth, while others sit empty and forlorn, unlikely to ever see again the child with the eyes lit up with joy. These old hotels are sad and neglected. Inside they are full of old dust, of which was once us, and old corridors of which once rung out with the songs of better days. Blackpool had fallen, it seems, and needed to work just to keep itself afloat. Various regeneration schemes were launched from the late 20th century to remedy this change in the town, and not all of them have been a success. A focus on stag and hen parties might have boosted attendance at pubs and clubs, for example, but dampened enthusiasm with visiting families and holiday makers. According to some, life expectancy in Blackpool is amongst the lowest in the country, with rates of homelessness amongst the top 10 in England. How could this happen? Has the overabundance of hotels and underabundance of seasonal, unstable work led to poverty? Has an influx of those seeking to escape from their problems with a move to Blackpool caused pockets of social and psychological decay? Or could it be that we have changed so much that we no longer care? We are no longer content with the things that gave Blackpool's first visitors so much joy. The reality of Blackpool's decline is multifaceted and difficult to pinpoint, but it should not be ignored. After all, if one were to whisper to those early pioneers that one day, not too distant, dust would settle on their proudest achievements, they would have dismissed you as some kind of fool. Even so, walk along the promenade when it is quiet, and it's hard not to feel wisps of old memory, some beautiful, some dreadful, moving around in a wind of remembering. Blackpool is an important place and must be cherished.
Hello, Left Hand Path. Don't forget, if you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.
Oh, fantastic.
So who are you then? What's your name?
My real name's Mark.
Mark. This is Mark from Left Hand Path. Do they know what you look like?
I've come for the famous £1
The famous
burger.
£1 burger
Looking
I've seen
forward-
on TV, I've seen on YouTube,
Absolutely.
I've seen on TikTok. Here we go.
Fantastic.
Zoom in, we can actually see you making as well. One burger. Well, there you go. Hopefully this will help. Don't forget to like that video, hit that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you later, guys.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much.
Behind this building site is the first stages of Blackpool Central, the latest and greatest of regeneration schemes. It will include new hotels, attractions and places to live, as well as cutting-edge shows and countless places to wine and dine until your heart's content. The goal is simple: to breathe new life into some of the areas most affected by decline, and to bring more people into Blackpool than ever before. Part of this new development has seen the old Bonny Street Market demolished, once a thriving place to buy and sell, and now shaping up to be something different entirely. After all, the motto of Blackpool is progress. In 2018, the Pleasure Beach opened their latest attraction, the launched roller coaster Icon, at a cost of over £16 million. It's smooth and modern, considered by some to be the best of its kind anywhere in the country, and with it came the Boulevard Hotel, offering luxury stays with views either over the sea or the Pleasure Beach, depending on your tastes. It's a world away from what could have been. In fact, 2021 saw a record 19 million people visit Blackpool, making up almost half of all visits to the county of Lancashire. That same year, the famous illuminations were extended for a month, and £1 million was invested to help further grow tourism in the resort. Even the tramway has been extended, running now from the main train station in the town, allowing easier access than ever before to the beach and promenade. And stand outside this station on a summer's day, and you will see one thing without any doubt: people still come to Blackpool in their droves, and likely always will. Perhaps the real key to Blackpool's regeneration is to look both towards its future investments and also into its past. After all, Blackpool is a rare place, where one can come and holiday in pretty much exactly the same way as their ancestors before them, as people have done for hundreds of years. Riding the tram, climbing the tower, braving the rides. These are the same things that first made people fall in love with the resort in the first place. There is still a place for those simple things. The things we crave when the promises of bigger and better are done with and forgotten. The things we always return to. The latest innovations may burst into life for their own brief moment, but all these things could easily pass away. The online server switched off. The latest trend left forgotten and unloved. But the beach will still be there, and so will that promise of holiday that first brought smiles to the faces of travellers, catching a glimpse of Blackpool Tower in the distance as their train approached. Yes, there is still something of magic and mystery to the place, to all its lights and colours and sounds. We must never lose it, because if we did we might lose something of ourselves too. And if it was lost, we would never be able to get it back. Blackpool is still a majestic showplace of mood and memory. Visit it and see for yourself, because the likes of this place will never be built again.